Hey everybody, welcome back to In Bed with a Millennial. I'm the Millennial Javeda Bay, and this is my bed. And I know, I was gone for a minute, but y'all, 2 PhD programs, a winter term was rough. But we're just gonna ignore that. It doesn't matter, because I'm here now, and it's April, which means that it's STI Awareness Month. And if you don't know, I am always about working to destigmatize and educate folks around STIs so that way, we don't have this like negative reaction when we talk about STIs or like contract an STI and things of that nature. So this month, that's what we're talking about, STIs. And today I specifically want to talk about what the actual STIs are. So we're going to be talking about STIs/STDs. So let's get into it. Okay, I obviously said STI/STDs. Jve, what's the difference? Like, why are there two different terms? Well, STI stands for sexually transmitted infections, and STD stands for sexually transmitted diseases. Like a few decades ago, STDs was really common language, but there's been a shift from using STDs because diseases generally hold some stigma. When you hear disease, people kind of get a little like, oh my goodness, no, about it. Whereas infection doesn't carry that stigma with it. So it's more common to use that. So that way we don't further perpetuate stigma and shame around STIs. So that's why there's two different ones. But another important fact when thinking about STIs and STDs is the difference in them. So if you don't know, there are like two types of STIs. You can have curable STIs and then manageable/treatable STIs, meaning the curable ones are ones that when they are, and once you contract them, you can take medication and clear them out of your system and you don't have to worry about it. Whereas treatable, manageable ones are ones that are going to remain in your body as soon as you contract them, like they're always going to be there, but there's medication to minimize the symptoms of them as well as the transmission of them. So let's dig into the different ones, shall we? So when it comes to curable STIs, there are four. You have syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, and trichomoniasis. You've probably heard of syphilis, gonorrhea, and chlamydia. Trichomoniasis is another common STI, but it's not as talked about because, well, we don't talk about STIs enough. But those are going to be the curable ones, meaning that medication can clear them out of your system. So let's dive into them a little deeper. Now, syphilis is an STI that actually has stages. That means like once it's contracted, it'll continuously develop throughout the different stages if not treated. And there are 4 stages: primary, secondary, latent, and tertiary. Primary is your initial, the initial like introduction of the STI into your system, and it can lead to sores on your body. The secondary stage is when you're going to have skin rashes as well as sores potentially. And then the latent stage is kind of when it's dormant, meaning that you more than likely will not see or notice any symptoms if you were to have syphilis. And then the tertiary phase is when the different symptoms of syphilis are going to start affecting different organ systems, meaning that untreated syphilis can actually have greater impacts on other parts of the body, which can then lead to death. So it's important that if you were to contract syphilis to actually get medication to handle it, because the last thing you want is to move through all of the stages and then potentially end up with some damaged organ systems or dying. We don't want that. No. And medication can solve the problem. The next STI is gonorrhea, which we've more than likely probably all heard of. It's not usually, but it has been called the clap as like its street name. But this is an infection that comes from bacteria, but it's treatable with antibiotics. And the gonorrhea can infect the genitals, your rectum, and your throat, which is why it's important to get STI testing in all of those areas. But that's a conversation for later. But gonorrhea, another treatable one, you get antibiotics, you take them for like a week. And once you take them, it should be clear out of your system and you're good to rock and roll. The next one is chlamydia, which is, an STI that if it goes untreated, it can actually have negative impacts on the female reproductive system, making it harder to get pregnant in the future. But it's again caused by a bacteria. And many people don't actually show symptoms if they have chlamydia, which is one of the reasons why chlamydia is a very common STI. But again, it's a curable STI, meaning that if you go get tested and get the right medication, you can knock it out of here, no problem, and be back doing your thing in like a week or so. And now trichomoniasis. Now this is a STI, an infection that's caused by a protozoan parasite, meaning that it is a parasite that's introduced into your body. And it generally impacts the vulva, the vagina, the cervix, and or the urethra inside of the female body as well as the male body. So it can happen in all those areas, and it's obviously transmitted through sexual activity. And it doesn't actually lead to infections to other parts of the body. So you don't need to worry about it spreading. Because when you hear parasite, you might be worried that like, oh my gosh, is it going to like start messing with other parts of me? No, the parasite truly just stays in the area of the vulva, vagina, cervix, and the urethra. But it can cause genital inflammation if it goes untreated. And that can also make you more susceptible to contracting other STIs. So again, this is why STI testing is important, because you don't want things to grow into a bigger problem. Do you? No, I didn't think so. But yeah, those are the 4 curable STIs, meaning that if you go and you have one, the doctor can prescribe you medication and you can get it cleared up and you don't have to worry about it again. Now, for the treatable, manageable STIs, there are again 4 of those as well. So the first treatable STI that I want to talk about is hepatitis B, which you've probably heard of hepatitis before. It's very commonly attached to like sharing needles and things of that nature. And that is one of the ways that hepatitis B can be transmitted from person to person, but it can also be transmitted through sexual activity. And this one is a viral infection that is going to attack your liver. And so this is something that stays in the body. And if it's not treated, can lead to things like psoriasis and liver cancer. So it's important to pay attention to these things. And one of the great things about hepatitis B is that you can get a vaccine for it, a vaccine that will 100% keep you protected from it. So if you haven't already gotten the vaccine, maybe talk to your medical provider about seeing if you can get it, because that can give you some serious peace of mind and not having to worry about nothing because you're like, oh no, I'm all good. I have my vaccine. Piece of cake. And though there are multiple strains of hepatitis, the only way to know if you have hepatitis B or C or A is by doing a blood test. A blood test is the only way to actually know which one you have, because the symptoms are not going to be able to tell you like, oh, this person only has hepatitis B. So if that were the case, you would need a blood test to know which one you got. The next treatable, manageable STI is going to be herpes, also known as the herpes simplex virus, HSV. And now this is a viral infection that produces blisters and ulcers on different parts of the body. There are 2 different strains, HSV1, which is generally going to be your oral herpes, and HSV2, which is going to be genital herpes. And fun fact about herpes, it's so common. So when it comes to herpes, it is estimated that 50 to 80% of US adults actually have herpes, making it one of the most common STIs out there. But most people that actually have herpes have never had an outbreak, which is why a lot of people don't even know that they have herpes. And so if you were to get tested for it, generally they stick to just testing sores or ulcers when they are present on the body, because most people are going to have a positive blood test even if they've never had an outbreak. But it's important to also know, like, if you do have it, you can still transmit herpes without actually having a present outbreak, which is why it's important to actually pay attention to these things, because if you have it, then actually getting on medication to make it more manageable helps to minimize the possibility of transmission, but also minimizes the number of outbreaks that you're going to experience. Now, the next treatable, manageable STI is HPV, the human papillomavirus. And this is, again, one of the most common STIs, and for a wide variety of reasons. The first one being, you can't actually test to see if someone has HPV. The only test that's ever done is going to be a pap smear, which tests to see if you have the HPV strain that is going to cause cervical cancer. Outside of that, there's really no way to know if you have HPV or if someone that you are engaging in sexual activity with has HPV, which is why it's recommended that you get the HPV vaccine. And this is like a 3-series vaccine that you get, and it protects you against certain strains of HPV, because there are multiple strains that can cause genital warts as well as cancer. And the vaccine that you get is generally going to protect you from getting strains of HPV that would lead to cancer, which is obviously a really good thing. But because HPV doesn't have a test, that's why it's extremely common. So many people are engaging in sexual activity without knowing that they have HPV, and then it gets transmitted on. So again, this is why it's just important to like practice safer sex methods or be vaccinated. Okay, the last one that we're going to talk about is HIV. So HIV is a virus that actually just attacks the body's immune system, making it weaker, which makes you more susceptible to other STIs as well as other infections and viruses that can just be contracted normally. And then if it continues to go untreated, it can lead to AIDS. But HIV is similarly to syphilis, has multiple stages, 3 stages to be exact, which is acute HIV infection, which is when it's first introduced into your body. And then you have chronic HIV infection when you've had it for a while, and symptoms can start to become more serious. And then that will lead you into the 3rd stage, which is when AIDS develops. Though HIV does not have a vaccine to prevent it, there are 2 different medications that can help with transmitting or not receiving HIV, and that is going to be PrEP and PEP. So PEP is post-exposure prophylactics and PrEP is pre-exposure prophylactic. And so depending on when you take them, PEP is used after you've been exposed to HIV. PrEP is used before you might be exposed to HIV. So there's a few different ways you can go about it. PrEP comes in a lot of different forms now. You can get it as a pill that you take every day. There's also a shot version of it. So depending on the types of sexual activity you engage in, you might want to consider talking to your medical provider about PrEP or PEP. But that's just the quick down and dirty on STIs. All this month, though, I'm going to keep talking about them because I want to make sure that we're all educated. We all understand. So if you have any questions about STIs, drop them in the comments. Visit me on my social media profiles. Check out my website. Read some blogs. But STIs, they're not the big bad scaries that we have been taught to think of them as. Like, yes, an inconvenience, sure they can be, but it's not the end of the world. And there's ways to minimize transmission, minimize your chances of contracting it, which is what we're going to talk about next week, because safer sex practices are beneficial if you do want to minimize STIs. But yeah, that's the quick, dirty rundown on the different STIs. But yeah, make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel because, again, I'm back, y'all. I'm on my stuff. And definitely make sure that you are subscribed to my email newsletter and you're following me on all the social media platforms because, again, I post different content everywhere. And yeah, that's that. I'm gonna see you later. Deuces.